Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate and Garrett Sutton's Corporate Direct.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Hey, welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. This is episode 81, now heard in 164 nations. Thank you for making us iHeartRadio's investing show choice. I've said it before that Robert Kiyosaki, the author of the landmark book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he probably had the greatest impact on how I think. Well, when it comes to what I do, the person that's had the greatest influence on me is Russell Gray, one half of the real estate guys. So I wanted to do something different today, okay? What is the next generation learning about investing? Now, Robert Kiyosaki doesn't have children, but Russell Gray does. So today we have the son of Russell Gray on Get Rich Education. At age 24, what kind of lessons did he learn growing up? How does he think? How does he communicate? And what is he doing with his life? Now, I've watched Sean Gray grow, okay, from where I met him more than 2 years ago on a real estate investing field trip in the Central American nation of Belize. That's back when Sean had longer hair and, he was more of a fly on the wall then, kind of listening and taking things in, and he's really grown since then. More recently, Sean and I were both attendees on the Panama Coffee Farm tour that I reported from on the show here. I was with Sean again recently in the Caribbean on the Investor Summit at Sea. So Sean is not your typical 24-year-old. So I consider myself very fortunate and grateful to have had a lot of, guests on the show whom are distinguished, decorated, renowned, very well established. What other adjectives can I use? Even famous industry guests here on Get Rich Education, like Richard Duncan, Garrett Sutton, Ken McElroy, Tom Wheelwright, Josh and Lisa Lannon, Stephen Kotler, Sharon Lechter, Frank Gallinelli, even John Lee Dumas, Tom Hopkins, and Russell Gray. I probably missed a couple there, but, the thing that they have in common is that they typically tend to be older than me, so I thought that Sean could give us a fresh perspective today. I am in Anchorage today. Sean is in Las Vegas, so let's meet Sean Gray. Today's guest started his entrepreneurial journey when he had turned 22 years old, which was only 2 years ago, by the way. That's when he had graduated college. He was 22 without a clue of what to do in his life. And on top of being clueless, he was also broke and sleeping on the floor in a small house with 10 other broke college guys. Within 6 months, he was making over $10,000 a month, traveling all over the world, meeting his business heroes, and most of whom have now become personal friends and mentors, and starting businesses. Today, he's just 24 years old, and he is an author, speaker, international real estate investor, business owner, a Rich Dad education representative, and most importantly, he has freedom. Welcome to Get Rich Education, Sean Gray.
Thanks, Keith. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's really great to have you here. So you are the son of Russell Gray, and I've said it before that Robert Kiyosaki, he probably had the greatest impact on how I think, and Russell Gray may very well have had the greatest impact on what I do. So what was it like to grow up around your dad, such a big investing brain and a substantial influencer in this whole real estate investing education space? What was that like, and what did you learn?
Yeah, growing up with my dad was it was quite a journey. It was, financially, from a financial perspective, we had ups and downs my entire upbringing. So it's not like, I had a silver spoon in my mouth or anything like that. But at the same time, he did teach me how to think, and specifically about money. You mentioned Kiyosaki being a guy that kind of broke those old paradigms about money for you. the same exact thing. And it was great growing up around my dad because that's really what he did. He challenged me to think, and he taught me how to ask great questions. He always would tell me, if you want great answers, you have to ask great questions. I think more than anything in terms of, less specifics, but just always thinking at the big picture, at that 30,000 foot view. I mean, you've had conversations with him, he's always strategizing, always planning. I think the biggest thing for me growing up with him was just being taught how to think and ask good questions.
Some people are probably looking at you a little bit skeptically, thinking, well, yeah, I mean, Sean's got his dad. Dad probably paid his way to all these events and everything you go to, but that's not true.
Yeah, that's actually not true. And I do get that a lot, actually. But I was actually, that was a big limiting belief for me, just speaking candidly here. That was a big limiting belief for me because, my dad did open up a lot of opportunities for me. But like what he said, when I would ask him about this, how do I address this with people, And he made a great point. And he said, well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, I'm the youngest of 6. So all my other siblings have had these types of opportunities too. Some of them had taken advantage of some of them at different points in their lives. But what he said he does is, and this is true, he creates environments. And this with the real estate guys, him and Robert are masterful at creating amazing environments. And that's what he did. He just creates the environments and then he gives people the choice. When I got out of school, I had the choice of, hey, do I want to go get a job or do I want to live this lifestyle? And he basically, like Morpheus, presented the red pill and the blue pill to me, and I had a choice to make. And then on top of that, you're exactly right. In terms of attending his events and the real estate guys' events and all that stuff, I've had to pay my way for everything. Their thinking and their logic behind that is, if I have skin in the game, that I'll take it a lot more seriously. And that's absolutely true. So investing in myself and putting myself in those environments was absolutely something that I had to do.
Yeah, sure. Now, you say that your dad taught you how to think. You're an entrepreneur. Did he get you to think maybe that to be employable is a bad thing? Most parents don't teach their children. They want you to get a job. Well, as soon as you get a job, you oftentimes get in a rut and you're not thinking for yourself anymore. So maybe it's actually a positive attribute growing up in an entrepreneurial home to be unemployable.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's funny. In spite of growing up in an entrepreneurial-minded house, I still went the traditional education route. It's hard hearing something from your dad. You grow up and it's like, your dad tells you this, your dad says, oh, yeah, that's great. You get out into the real world and somebody else tells you and you're like, oh, wait, that kind of makes sense what he was saying all along. So for me, it was obviously Rich Dad, Poor Dad, kind of that paradigm shift that kind of brought it full circle. Like, okay, this is kind of what he's been leading me towards. But I had to see for itself. I had to come to the realization myself. But growing up, I mean, in the system, in the school system, and everything, just young people were constantly on a track, constantly being told where to go, how to dress, when to be there. And it got to a point where when I graduated college, it just felt like I was floating in space. Like I was on this track, didn't really have to do too much thinking for myself. And then poof, all of a sudden I'm floating in space. So it was awesome having my dad there to just kind of say, hey, here's this lifestyle, here's this opportunity, check this out.
Now, did you get any financial education in your high school classes or your college classes?
That's a big fat no. And it's sad because, like what Robert talks about, and I'm sure your listeners know, that there's 3 types of education: the professional education or traditional education, like our school and everything, professional education, like if you're going to be doctor or lawyer, and then there's financial education. I would argue that financial education is the most important. I mean, like it or not, money makes the world go around. And if you don't understand money, especially young people, think about how much of a disadvantage they're at already going into the real world and not understanding anything about how money works, how our banking system works, how our monetary system works. They're at a huge disadvantage.
They are at a huge disadvantage. And I want to talk more about what the masses learn and all that. But, first, you've really got this compelling story. At just 22, you graduated college. 6 months later, you're making over $10K a month traveling the world. What's that turning point? How does a person do that? Tell us about that.
It's actually, you said it, it's a turning point. one of my favorite books, my all-time favorite books, is Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. And really, at some point, it comes down to a decision whether you're in enough pain or you see the value of making the change, where you just have to make the decision to turn pro. So stop living, as Stephen Pressfield talks about, like an amateur, and start living as a professional. So at some point, you really just have to make that transition. Luckily for me, I had people around me who were showing me, hey, these are all the opportunities and this is the way the real world works. So starting out in the real world, I think the best thing that young people can do, and really what I did in terms of, answering your question of how I made the transition and started, I did three things, and they're really, it's nothing new, but in following my mentors around and studying the most successful people I could find, it really came down to this: changing the way I thought, getting a mentor, and changing the people I was around. Once I did those things, opportunities that I couldn't even have scripted started presenting themselves. And that's really how I got into a lot of the relationships and started accelerating my success. Really was changing the people I was around, getting a mentor, and starting to change the way I thought about money, about the real world, just in terms of thinking like a successful person.
Yeah, so what you've done, you've changed your environment, you've changed your context. So this entrepreneurial behavior that some people would see as risky, you kind of have a frame of reference in that if you've made these people friends and they're doing it, you can see yourself doing it too. You could read about some stranger doing it, but that might not motivate you than a person right next to you that you've kind of brought in as a friend. If they can gain financial freedom, you can too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with this turning point, I think people want to know, how did you generate this income? How did you go from being broke and sleeping on the floor of a small house with 10 other broke college guys?
Yeah.
Where did the income actually come from? That's often a byproduct of your network, but how did that transition take place? Where did the income come from?
Well, you nailed it. That's exactly right. It's a byproduct of my network. And the big picture answer, in short, the answer is sales. I immersed myself, and it was great. There was another great thing that I got from my dad. If anybody who knows my dad knows, he is a great salesman. He's a diligent student for years and years of Tom Hopkins, and kind of followed in those footsteps. Not only did I learn it just being around my dad and seeing him internalize everything that Tom taught him, but I immersed myself in, attending Tom Hopkins trainings, reading books like Sell or Be Sold or How to Master the Art of Selling. And really, learning the sales skill has gotten me into the relationships that opened the doors and allowed me, and presented the opportunities that allowed me to make that type of income. Specifically, what it came down to was I got into a relationship with Andy Tanner, and eventually Andy Tanner, he just kind of took a liking to me, which was awesome. And he invited me to actually attend one of his seminars. We were on the Real Estate Guys Summit at Sea. And he said, hey, when we get back to your hometown, I'm going to be having a seminar right there in your hometown. You're welcome to come, sit in, listen, see what I do. Maybe you'll learn some things. And it was great. So took him up on the offer. I went and sat in on his room and that was with Rich Dad Education. And we started playing the cash flow game. And there was probably about 175 people in the room. I was 22 at the time. We started playing the cash flow game, and I was one of the only people in the room to get out of the rat race. So I started helping everybody because I'd played the game before. It was fun, and so I started helping everybody at my table get out of the rat race too. And so his team came up to me after and saw me what I was doing. And by that time, I was introduced to Andy's team, and they knew I had a relationship with Andy. And they came up to me after and said, "Hey, you clearly know what you're doing. You're passionate about this stuff. Why don't you come on board with us here at Rich Dad?" Wait, hold on. You're telling me I get paid to travel, hang out with a bunch of investors, and share something I'm passionate about? Yeah, okay. Sign me up. So that's kind of how I got into that position. And based off of that and leveraging my sales skills, my income took off. On top of that, when I got out of school, I really got into, I'm not sure if it's kind of a controversial topic sometimes, but I got into shooting guns. It was a fun hobby. If anybody's ever shot guns before, they know that it's an expensive hobby. So every time I would go and shoot guns, there's dollar around. So instead of working hard so I could get enough money to go do the thing I wanted to do, what I decided to do was ask myself a great question. Like what I told you, my dad would tell me all the time, if you want great answers, you got to ask great questions. And I said, if I'm going to be doing this anyway, how can I get paid to do it? How can I afford to do this anyway? If I'm going to be doing this? How could I get paid to do it?
Right.
So what we did was we set up a business around firearms. And I won't get too much into the details for the sake of time of how we started that business, but essentially it's a marketing company that provides some passive income so that the asset offsets the liability.
Right. So to set that up and find and kind of monetize your passion, you built the right network around you. You gravitated toward a person that related to you, or maybe it was vice versa. And that's the sort of thing that opens up opportunities. We're in an increasingly virtual world, but I'm just talking to the listeners now. You got to remember, even in an increasingly virtual world, behind every business and behind every check that's written, there is still a human being. And sales is the most fundamental skill in business and even in real estate investing. When you're in a syndication and you're trying to attract partners to your deal, that is basically a sales skill where you're selling your competencies and your attributes to that prospective investor. Even when you're trying to self-manage and rent out a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment, your sales skill comes into it. So sales is so fundamental. And it's interesting that you brought up the cash flow board game, Sean, because a couple months ago, we were on the Investor Summit at Sea. We've got some rather sophisticated investors in the room playing the cash flow board game, several dozen of us in there. And the person up in the front of the room facilitating the cash flow board game on the Summit at Sea while Robert Kiyosaki is there on the Summit at Sea is Sean Gray.
Yeah, that was an amazing experience. That was especially to have Robert there. And it was a dream come true. One of my heroes, the guy who really changed my thinking and ultimately through the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, changed my life. To have him stand up in front of a group like that and say that he's proud of me for what I'm doing and teaching his concepts and everything, that was a dream come true.
Yeah, I was right there in that room when that took place. So I guess, how do you project yourself to, I guess I would say, a lay person in the world? Like, how would you give your elevator pitch to somebody? Because look, an average 24-year-old is not an author, speaker, international real estate investor, business owner, and Rich Dad Education representative. How do you project yourself? What do you tell someone when they ask, what do you do, Sean?
That's a great question, and it's always difficult for me to answer.
It's got to be.
Yeah, because the way I describe it best, I think, is that once you just discover what your major definite purpose is and the value that you truly want to add to the world and the way you want to be remembered and the legacy that you leave behind, once you discover what that bigger purpose is, suddenly you don't view work as work and play as play. It's all living. The lines suddenly blur together. So the way I describe it, it's hard to describe it to someone who thinks differently about money, to be honest, because when you think differently about money, you think differently about the world and they have no context. I could tell them, hey, this is what I do, and it wouldn't really make sense. They wouldn't really understand. For example, the first chapter of my book, and this might be the best way to sum up my philosophy and the way I approach things, is the first chapter is start retired. Don't live to get paid to live. See, so many people, this is kind of just my philosophy, and this is really where the conversation goes when somebody asks me what I do. There's times when people will ask me, and I can tell they're just asking kind of just to have conversation, not really interested. So I'll just give them a short answer. Oh, I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm a business owner, or I do marketing, or I do sales, or something like that. But when somebody's genuinely asking, I let them know that, hey, this might spark a bigger conversation. And 9 times out of 10, it does. And this is where it normally goes. The big thing is, especially for young people, they get out of school and they ask themselves, what do I do to make money? What do I do to make money? That immediately makes money the end goal, and doing something, exchanging your time and effort as the means or as the way to get that money. The question that I ask myself and how I approach other things is, what can I build that will afford me the lifestyle I want to live? Now, instead of doing something, building something is how you get there. And instead of money being the end goal, lifestyle is the end goal. Now, sure, both building and doing something require work in the beginning, but I'm sure your listeners and you've heard the phrase, entrepreneurship is spending a few years of your life like most people won't, so you can spend the rest of your life like most people can't. And really, that's where the conversation goes when somebody asks me what I do. And I just say, what I do is I think differently about money. And because of that, I'm able to live freely. I'm able to do what I want, when I want, how I want, with who I want.
Yeah, you're thinking differently because you grew up learning to ask yourself better questions. So no wonder you've given yourself better answers. How many 24-year-olds talk about legacy like this? These are some great words of wisdom. And I'm sure after that 2-minute elevator ride, if you tell the person riding in the elevator next to you, after they ask you what you do, you tell them, well, I start retired. I'm sure that usually brings up a longer conversation.
Yeah, it definitely does. People are always kind of curious about that, but I like it. It's fun. I love sharing this stuff because it's liberating.
Yeah, that is an absolutely great way to think about it. When we come back, we're going to ask Sean a little bit more about real estate investing, and we're also going to ask him about how others learn with a financial education that's more based around cash flow than it is around capital gains. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Sean Gray. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold.
Garrett Sutton here, Robert Kiyosaki's asset protection attorney and the author of Loopholes of Real Estate. As an American or foreign-based investor in U.S. real estate, you know we are a litigious society. You know that you need to protect your real estate and paper asset holdings with the right mix of LLCs and corporations. My firm, Corporate Direct, not only forms these entities, but importantly, we properly maintain them too. If you fail to follow the corporate formalities, you can lose it all in an instant. Corporate Direct is your source for LLC protection and maintenance in all 50 states. Visit corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Get Rich Education for a free bonus. Switch your resident agent service to us and receive another bonus. It's all good. We look forward to assisting you at corporatedirect.com.
Are you looking for a roadmap to financial freedom? If so, we have a solution for you. Norada Real Estate is offering a limited number of free strategy sessions to help you get out of the rat race. Learn how you can create wealth and build monthly passive income. To set up a time with one of our knowledgeable investment counselors, simply go to noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
Hi, this is Russell Gray, co-host of the Real Estate Guys radio show, and you're listening to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our featured guest, Sean Gray. So, Sean, you've got this income from sales. You went ahead and turned some of that income into passive real estate income. You come from a real estate investing family. Tell us about your real estate investing experience. Why real estate?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I'm sure your listeners know and you've educated them on why real estate in the big picture. And really, it's that passive income. You know, I sit down with a lot of people within Rich Dad when I do these strategy sessions, kind of these coaching sessions. And most people, what they're after is freedom. And real estate provides exactly that. Passive income cash flow is AKA just another word for freedom. Gives us the time freedom to be able to do what we want. So at the big picture, that is why real estate, passive income. The great thing about it is it's one of the fastest ways to acquire passive income in terms of the leverage, the tax advantages, the creative financing ways. Over time, real estate goes up. And the other big thing that makes real estate such a great investment is that it actually provides real value. You're not just guessing on the price of a stock or something like that, not really adding value. Real estate provides real value to people. And that's something I really love about it.
Yeah, there's some real utility there. We know there's going to be a durability of that utility in the future because it's been there for millennia. And I'm a big real estate investor, but I'm not so much in love with real estate, really. I'm more in love with what real estate can do for me. I'm not so in love with concrete, bricks, wood, and windows. I'm in love with that passive income stream and the time that opens up. And it really comes down to those touchy things like peace, joy, happiness, love, and freedom that creates for us. That's what we ultimately want.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better.
Now, you're a Rich Dad education representative, and that gives you the ability to get out and go to seminars and speak from the front of the room, I would imagine. I guess as a millennial, a lot of people don't really see millennials in that role. Now, you have a unique perspective. You can see things from a different lens. Is it actually easier to teach other millennials because they don't cling to old stereotypes, or do you have people from Generation X and older that can relate to you, or how do you break things down for them? How do people learn differently?
It is interesting seeing the different dynamics and the different demographics of the people in the room and how they learn and the types of questions that they ask. That's really, really the distinguishing difference, really. The millennials, the younger people are asking questions about like what if type questions and questions out of more excitement and expectations and things like that. Where the people, the older generation are asking questions more out of, I don't want to say fear, but kind of a conservative mindset, like just how do I maintain security? And it's more questions like that. So it's interesting to see that difference. But everybody in that room, regardless of age, is there for the same reason and really has the same desires. And like I was saying, what they're really after is freedom. When it comes to teaching them, none of them have had any type of financial education. So everybody's really, at least in the rooms that I'm with Rich Dad, everybody's really starting in the same place. So I'm able to communicate well with younger people and older people alike. I think I do, like you were saying, I have a unique positioning in the fact that because I've been in this world a little bit longer than most young people, I'm able to have the conversations with the older generations and, speak their language. But at the same time, I'm not so far removed from the recent college graduates or maybe the guys who are still in college. And I'm able to relate to them and speak their language too. So I really feel like I can bridge that gap. People relate to me in different ways. Everybody is different. So some people relate to certain stories that I share, and other people just, really just latch on to maybe a quote or something. But really, everybody who comes in that room doesn't have much financial education. So the starting point and the end result are very similar.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like when you're speaking from the stage, across generations, there are sort of these commonalities. And maybe that's because you told me back at the beginning of the interview, even though you graduated from high school really not all that long ago, and from college not all that long ago, they're still not teaching financial education in school. So that has not changed across generations. So, what I really see, Sean, is before people are ready to learn about financial education, learn about how to go from a scarcity mentality to an abundance mentality, I think it really comes down to unlearning before they learn. For example, most people that probably come into the room at a Rich Dad education seminar, they're probably thinking that a 401k is a great investment and that home equity is a great investment. And they're probably most heavily invested in their 401k or their retirement plan and their home equity. So it's got to be a revelation to those people to find out, you know what, your 401k doesn't produce any income until you're 65. A great investment produces income in young age, in middle age, and in old age. And then you can break down their home equity. And actually, it's a revelation to them to find out, well, you know what? The return from home equity is actually zero, and it always will be zero. Well, that's probably a revelation to them. They need to unlearn. But once they're ready to learn, I think people like you and I actually have really good news for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you talk about the 401ks and things like that. And back to your question about the way millennials learning in their kind of ways of thinking about money. As millennials, we all got our way of thinking about money from the older generations. So again, they're still instilled those internalized paradigms about money that even young people have when maybe they haven't had the real world experience. But when you were talking about the 401ks and stuff, that's definitely something I use for the older generations because, if you just look at just the natural demographic shift, right? We have 10,000 baby boomers retiring every single day, turning age 65. When they hit age 65, they're forced to pull money out of their retirement account. Just by the demographic shift alone, what do you think is going to happen to the stock market and to people's 401ks and retirement accounts?
It's going to be more sellers and buyers.
Exactly. So that's definitely a topic of conversation out on the weekends, especially with the older folks. And then the millennials, they're looking at their parents, they're looking at their grandparents, right? And the generations before them and realizing that, hey, this old way of thinking about money, get a job, save, loyalty to one company type thing, and invest in a 401k and you're going to be set. They're realizing that it's not working. That's why I think now more than ever, the economy is set for entrepreneurs to think differently about money. It's almost to the point where you have no choice. The society's paradigm about money is slowly changing because of the times and because of where we're at as an economy. They're almost being forced to change, which is a great thing. And I think as a time to be a young entrepreneur, there's not a better time in history.
Well, so much of it starts with thinking. I mean, what are some ways you found to kind of help morph a student from a scarcity mentality to an abundance mentality? Some people call that changing them from a fixed mentality to allowing them to see a growth mentality. What are some examples you have that have really moved people from one to the other?
That's really a great question. I don't think I can have somebody make that transition in their way of thinking from scarcity mentality to abundance mentality. I mean, I can tell them what the differences are and point them out so that when they start speaking out of scarcity mentality, that they recognize that I can do those pattern interrupts, right? Which does help. But I honestly believe that they have to experience it for themselves. They have to see that they can get all they want in life if they help enough other people get what they want. And when they see the results, when they start just having faith in abundance mentality and speaking how people with abundance mentality speak, and they start seeing the results, that's really when they make that morphing that you said, that transformation from living their life in scarcity to living their life in abundance. The best I can do is just ask them questions about their thinking and about their mode of operation that bring it to their attention. But I think the biggest thing, and I sound like a broken record when I'm out on the weekends talking, I say change the way you think, get a mentor, change the people you're around. If you do those three things, I guarantee you will be successful. And the most important one out of those, which really shapes the other two, is changing the people you're around. So how do you get somebody go from scarcity mentality to abundance mentality? Start hanging around people who live in abundance mentality.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. So any particular light bulb moments you see in students where they really start to get it and they really start to see that investing, it really is not about capital gains. It's about what something like real estate generates in cash flow.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really incredible, actually. So I start all of my strategy sessions. And if you know anything about the sales process, right, people buy emotionally and then they defend it logically, right? They place the order with their heart and then their brain figures out how to fill that order.
Right.
So when I ask the question of what do you really want in life? And I generally ask the question, okay, imagine that you have millions of dollars. Imagine that every day for the rest of your life, I told you, I'll write you a check for $1 million. You don't have to think about money, worry about investing, starting business, nothing. Money is the last thing on your mind. You have plenty of it. How would you spend your time? And you'll be so surprised on how long it takes people to answer that. They've never thought of this question before.
Right. And that's because they're so used to settling all of their lives.
Exactly. And they're so used to it's about money, right? It's everywhere. It's about money. And they end up two-stepping the process. They don't build the lifestyle. So when I ask them that question and it takes them so long, they're like, wow, I've never even thought about that before. They don't even know. So then I just start asking more questions to draw out what they want. And most of the time, the same things come up. People want to travel, people want to spend time with their family, and people want to help others in some way, whether it's charities, mission trips, or things like that. And then I go on to ask them, I say, okay, now would you want to just travel every single day, all day for the rest of your life? And they're like, well, no. And I said, well, would you just want to sit at home with your family all day, every day for the rest of your life? And they said, well, no. And I said, okay, so can we agree that what you want to do every day would change on a day-to-day basis? Yes. So can we sum up what you're really after is freedom? You want to be able to do what you want when you want? Yes, that's exactly what I want. And it's like they've never been able to articulate that before. I have to dig deep to find out, hey, what is it that you really want? I'm human nature. Most of us want freedom. Then when I show them that, okay, if freedom's what you're after, what's the fastest path to freedom? I'm assuming you want to live that life sooner rather than later. What's the fastest path to freedom? And they say money. Well, great. What type of money? There's earned income, there's passive income, there's portfolio income. Which one of those by definition does not fit the definition of freedom? They say earned income. Great. So passive and portfolio. Okay, now what's the fastest way to get passive income? And they say, well, acquiring assets. Great. What type of assets? And obviously we're in a real estate setting. So they say real estate. And I say, I agree, because that is, in terms of like we were talking about earlier, the leverage, the tax advantages and all that. And it's made more millionaires than any other industry. So when they see that path, that's kind of when the light bulb goes off for them. Like, hey, okay, I see how real estate can get me to where I want to be the fastest. But the big thing is most of them can't even articulate where they want to be because they haven't taken the time to think about that. And back to how we kind of started this off, they haven't asked great questions.
Right. And most people have settled for so long that they don't even know what they want. They can't even tell you what they want. It is so difficult to dig that back up out of a person and excavate it and go ahead and put it out there because they've basically believed the same limiting paradigm for so long that they thought there's no way that they can really get what they want. So they've hidden it down deep, trapped inside their body, and it can take some time to get it out. That's why I say you have to unlearn before you can learn.
That's right. So true. So true. I love that.
I love your line about how people often buy things emotionally and they basically justify it logically. They don't take a strategic top-down approach, just like in real estate.
Yeah.
The property is really only about the fourth most important thing. And a lot of people try to buy a nice looking property emotionally and then find out that they bought it in a job loss market or something, but keep trying to justify it logically because they're in love with the way that the shutters look on the duplex or some nonsense like that. So
exactly.
Now, you get around an awful lot of thought leaders. You've basically been able to formulate a decent macroeconomic opinion through your lens. I know when we were driving around Miami a couple months ago, you gave me a ride from the airport there as we were getting ready for the Summit at Sea. You said you felt that a crash is imminent in less than a year. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I'm by no means an expert. I mean, I've done my fair share of studying, and I do religiously study the economy on a macro level. But really what I do is I just listen to, look at history because it teaches us a lot about what to expect. Everything in life is cyclical. But the other thing I do is I just listen to the economists and the people who are excelling. And, Robert predicted the last crash, and him and, guys like Peter Schiff and Simon Black, and they're all saying the same thing. And if you study what they're saying and then you look around through that lens, the writing's on the wall, really. I mean, just some basic things. Look at inflation, look at our debt, look at things like that. No civilization in history has survived past 98% inflation, right? We're at 97% or something like that.
Right.
It just, the writing's on the wall if you know what to look for. And the fact that that's a question, the fact that we're talking about it, it's becoming more and more imminent, and it's becoming more and more topics of conversations on investing podcasts and shows and at conferences and things like that.
Yeah, it's true. The United States, we really do continue to have, and especially lately, ever since the advent of the internet about 20 years ago, we have an awful lot of technology startups. You're a millennial. You think millennial entrepreneurship and technology can help save us from an economic disaster?
Good question.
That's a tough one. No one knows the answer.
Here's what I think. I think that short answer is no. I don't think this is something that we can save. I think we've gone too far down the rabbit hole, if you will. But the flip side of that, the flip side of every problem is an opportunity. So I think that through technology and through just the millennial ambition and kind of what has shaped the millennial thinking in terms of money and how we approach things, I think there's a massive opportunity for millennials, especially combined with technology, to thrive during the economic disaster. So I don't think necessarily we can save it, but we can make sure that the direction coming out of it on the other side is a good direction.
Yeah, sure. And we're going to have Robert Kiyosaki on the show here in 3 weeks, and I'm sure he's going to tell us about 2016 being the beginning of, really a demographic cliff when, kind of like we mentioned earlier, Sean, when the boomers start withdrawing from their 401ks and you have more sellers than buyers. Well, Sean, as we're kind of winding down here, do you have any favorite investing books, websites, or apps here coming from the millennial angle?
My top 3 favorite books, and people ask me this all the time, what are your favorite books? What do you recommend reading? My top 3 favorite books, and not necessarily in this order because it'd be too hard to rank, but obviously Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think that should be everybody, that should be in schools, that should be the financial education Bible. If I had $1 for every time somebody said that book changed their life, I'd be a lot richer. But that book for sure. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. The next book, what I mentioned earlier, Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield, has had a huge impact on my journey. And the last one is Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. And not too many people are familiar with that book. They obviously know his book, Think and Grow Rich, but Outwitting the Devil is, you can see my face right now. My eyes light up every time I just bring it up. It is a deep book, so don't read it unless you're really ready. It definitely should not be your first personal development or kind of thought book for sure. But those are my top 3 favorite books. In terms of lists and podcasts, obviously your podcast is great. the Real Estate Guys podcast. The list that is my favorite list and that I read every day that I'm subscribed to is Simon Black's list, Sovereign Man. He does these notes from the field where he is basically writing from wherever he is in the world on his adventures, and he just gives you a big picture. And I think that's really what millennials, young people, need to get early on. They need to see the big picture. Because, like you've heard my dad say, and I've heard him say thousands of times, with clarity of vision, strategy, and tactics become evident. When you have that clear vision of that, what the big picture looks like and what you want it to look like, both internally and externally, the steps to get there become very clear. And that's one thing that I think that young people need to figure out. Don't worry about so much about the details. What am I going to do to make money? What's next? Where to go? All that stuff. Focus on the big picture. And the small stuff will take care of itself.
All right. Yeah, very good. Yes, Sovereign Man's notes from the field really are excellent. And Get Rich Education's developer here, my right-hand man, John Collins, a few years ago, he went to Barnes & Noble, bought every copy of the book Rich Dad Poor Dad that they had. I think it was only 8 of them or so. And he just gave them out to people. And John's line was, I feel like I'm handing out Bibles to the sinners.
Yeah, exactly. That's so funny.
Anything else you want to tell Get Rich Education Nation that I haven't asked you, Sean?
If I had to give my number one piece of advice, and again, I sound like a broken record, but change the way you think, get a mentor, and change the people you're around. You do those 3 things, you're going to be amazed at the rate of growth and how fast you accelerate in the real world.
Yeah, that's the real message here. Well, how can our audience find out more about you?
They can go to realworldmasters.com, real world, like welcome to the real world. So realworldmasters.com. And I have a free gift for your listeners and just an ebook, very powerful ebook, kind of talking about those 3 things: changing the way you think, get a mentor, change the people you're around. So they can go there and find out more about what that's all about and see me.
Thanks, Sean. And again, that's realworldmasters.com. And I take it that's like getting your master's degree in the real world?
You got it. That's exactly what it is.
Great name. Hey, thanks so much for coming on to the show, Sean.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, I told you, not your typical 24-year-old. Okay, if you want freedom, number 1, Sean says, change the way you think. Number 2, get a mentor. Number 3, get around the right peer group. Have those aspirational friends. Now, if you're thinking Sean had his dad, okay, and even though Sean didn't have to pay his own way to events, he had the wherewithal to go to events so he could get connected, so no wonder this happened. Well, I think someone might be missing the point. Sean still needed other people, mentors, to want to invest their time in him, okay? When Sean goes to events, or when you or I go to events, what you're doing is you're demonstrating to people that you are willing to invest in yourself. Well, if you don't invest in yourself, why would anyone else? Okay, so when you're at an event, that is proof that you're willing to invest in yourself, and that makes someone else want to invest in you. And I didn't come from a real estate or an entrepreneurial family at all, but I go to events. Even though I'm relatively shy, I can walk up to someone and introduce myself to that person, and that's how I've connected myself like I have. So it has more to do with you than where you've come from, all right? The Tom Hopkins sales influence is definitely apparent in the Gray household. And my interview with Tom is back on episode 12, if you ever want to listen to that. And Tom is the consummate salesperson. We chatted on the Summit at Sea, and he asked when he was going to return to Get Rich Education. I'm sure I'll be happy to have him sometime. Always be selling, I guess. Next week, I'm going to talk to you simply about how to buy an income property. The process. Yeah, just that simple. From submitting the earnest money to escrow to the inspection, the appraisal, filling out the management agreement for your property manager, using a mobile notary if you're buying out of state, all the way on through to closing step by step. That's next week. The father of today's guest, Russell Gray, was here with me on episode 41. 40 shows later on episode 81 here, it was Sean. You are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Today, 2 of those 5 were Sean Gray and I. Check out Sean at realworldmasters.com. I appreciate you being here, but you aren't here for me. You're here for you. You might quit your day job, but don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.